I have heard that he has a tender rear.
Hold on.
Hey, can you turn around though so we can see the shirt?
Please don't harass me.
Safe spaces.
So I'm Alex, and this is actually a presentation that I did recently in Boise at the ISSA conference. I keep getting that wrong because they had my picture, and or they had my name with Dave Kennedy's picture to troll me. So I kept calling it the ISACA conference. But anyway, it's a little bit different because I changed the cover page, so be ready for that. So my background, I actually started out working at Secure State, and then I went on and worked at a software company in Beechwood that ended up being sold to Oracle, which was pretty cool. And then obviously when Dave got TrustSec going, I went over there. Been there about 3 years. So I run the GRC department. Can you hear the microphone?
Can you put the lapel on that?
Yeah, I can. But anyway, I also went to Baldwin Wallace, so that's pretty awesome. Fellow yellow jacket. So I ended up, is this on? So I graduated from there. I started out at Ohio University, and then I transferred to Case Western. And then, of course, I'm older than I look. I just have really good skin. So that was supposed to be funny, but it looks like this is not my audience today. All right, I'll be serious. So anyway, I ended up finishing there. I have a business degree, not a technical degree. So anyway, I was, that is right. So anyway, I was going out to Boise, and I had this presentation written, and it was all about a programmatic approach to information security. And I talked to the guy running it out there. It's pretty clear that it was a pretty technical audience. And I always think that technical audiences need to hear more program-type presentations, and more auditor-type audiences to hear more technical-type presentations. So when I was talking to Mick, and I said to him, what would you present on? And he kind of threw me for a loop, in that he said, I would present on what I think are 3 of the biggest challenges. And of course, he's a pretty technical guy. He's a SANS instructor, everything else. I thought he'd come up with something like spearfishing or some kind of more technical answer, but that's not what he said at all. And I ended up agreeing with him. And let me clarify, it's the 3 biggest things that we can't control that we have to deal with. Because there's obviously a lot of things that we can control. So attackers, obvious, right? I mean, we deal with that all the time. Everything from hobbyists, organized groups, all kinds of things. You deal with that day in and day out, right? So there's not a ton to say about that. But, it's really, I think, that understanding who they are and what they're after, making sure that, you don't necessarily see a ghost behind every door, but that you understand that the risks are very real. So regulators. This is one of my favorites. So, and I'm going to include internal audit in that. But one of the reasons is because you have no control over what regulations come out. You can argue that probably on the perimeter a little bit, that you may have certain say in lobbying or whatever, things like that. But in general, you have very little control over what the regulators are doing. And what happens with that is you end up spending a lot of time on things that might meet the regulations but don't move anything forward, right? I mean, who deals with that? Anybody? And one of the craziest things is when you're out at a financial company or an insurance company around the times when they're starting to give guidance. And they won't necessarily come out with new regs, but they'll tell you what they're thinking about doing a year later. So, of course, everyone tries to start doing those things, and maybe they do them, maybe they don't. So that's something people deal with. So how often do we hear about compliance not being security? All the time, right? So one of the things I think is important, though, too, is to understand the overlap. I am a QSA. I don't usually discuss that a whole lot because people tend to not think that's awesome. I do, though. But anyway, the thing with PCI, I think that is if everybody did everything that's in that standard, I think the world would be a better place, right? More secure in general. And so it's understanding kind of what you want to do from a security perspective, what you want to do from a compliance perspective, looking at what's in the middle, making sure you do all that stuff, and then obviously figuring out the way to do the 2 things that are outside it. All right, who has been dealing with insurance, cyber insurance? So one of the things I get to do more often than I'd like to is fill out vendor assessments. Anybody else deal with those? They send them out, or anybody write them? And I actually end up doing a lot of projects where I'll go out for companies and assess their vendors and put together programs for how they can assess their vendors. I'm actually working on 2 large ones. I'm gold on Delta for the year, and it's pretty early in the year because my Delta year starts in February, so I travel a bit. So just tell you how much. So anyway, so we're running around doing that. But you always hear about this insurance, and the problem is you have no control over what it costs because it costs what they tell you it costs. And the thing is, I mean, would anybody here want to hold the bag on the cyber insurance? Yes.
I have a question about cyber insurance, actually, because I just attended a session down at the City Club, and it was directed around cyber security and law firms. And the law firms were saying that, surprisingly, they don't think they have anything to safeguard. So, yeah, and some of them have been real targets because of this. But one of the subtopics of conversation was cyber insurance. And that was the first time I'd actually heard of cyber insurance was when I was there. But what I don't get is, who is underwriting these policies? And, is there a way that you, how do I want to say this? Is there a way that you can't be covered because you didn't do something on your end?
Absolutely. And so one of the things about well, first of all, obviously it's been a lot of turmoil in the past year. They've been changing the limits. I think I'm being recorded, so I don't want to just throw facts out there that are incorrect. If I wasn't being recorded, I'd probably just gloss over them. But I think they upped the limit, maybe low, it's like 100 million they'll cover or something like that. It's something really big. And the problem is that what you're seeing now, if you read the news, is that there are times that the insurance are not paying out on claims because they're claiming people didn't do their due diligence. And from my perspective, as someone that does a lot of assessments and audits and kind of looks at programs, I can't imagine writing a huge policy on a company after doing a week or a 2-week audit. I mean, you'd want to be in there for a long time and really understand what they're doing. So I think that, one of the things they really worry about, I forget the name for it, but it's like what a hurricane is. But it's basically one event that hits multiple insured clients is what they worry about. So if there's a huge event that hits everybody. And so yes, the due diligence question and whether they're going to pay it out, I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I always tell people to make sure you're figuring it out.
Yeah, every contract is different. We review multiple insurance companies, just like when you do auto insurance. Every policy is going to be different. You can negotiate a policy. Our law department negotiate the policies. We can get certain discounts or not certain discounts. There's certain things that are underrated, some aren't. Just like a general insurance, anything else you have insurance for.
Right. I think one of the challenges too is, in risk, you can say out of 100 people that do X, 95 will be fine. But what I can't tell you is whether you're going to be one of those 5. That's an impossibility. So that's something you deal with too a lot, so.
What about these people that sell it? Do they have to be qualified in any way to sell it, or is it considered a rider, or what?
So I will, is that still recording? No, I think that there's always a question, and that when you look at people doing audits or assessments, et cetera, and you look at everything that goes into an information security program, and you think of all the domains, and think of who can really understand all those, right? I mean, who's an expert in, say, firewall management, but also can do, 10 other things? I don't know that person, but they're probably driving a Lamborghini, right? So, maybe they're out there, but in general, so yeah, I mean, it's who are they sending out to audit? I don't know. Is it people with 30 years of experience? If you can even have that in our industry? Probably not, right? Yeah. So I certainly would not want to be holding the bag or underwrite those policies. And again, because it's how good is the data? Because I don't know, right? I mean, as I said, even companies that you might work with for a few years, you don't know everything, and there's just so many different risks that you can think of that you don't even know about. What if you piss off somebody by sending the wrong order, and it turns out they're some great basement hacker that's willing to spend 90 hours a week trying to break into you, right? I mean, how do you quantify that? So what can we do? So technical solutions are not enough. So I'm big on programs. I think you hit a lot of really good points. And one of the things is I think that one of the reasons I end up getting asked to come back to places is because I'm not as smart as everybody else. So because the thing is it's great if you can know every technical detail and you can read zeros and ones, but if you can't articulate why that matters to people that are making business decisions, it doesn't matter, if you can't do that. All right. Who has a treadmill? Anybody? All right. So I gained like 9 pounds last week from prednisone because I work in IT, so I have asthma. It's kind of required. So anyhow, right? So, but the point is, if I go out and buy a treadmill, am I in shape? I mean, I can put my living room in front of the TV. I can put my garage, but I'm not in shape. You have to use it, right? And so I remember one time with a client being out there, and we used to joke about firewalls like sitting on a shelf. And I was sitting in someone's office, and I kind of was looking over, and there was a box there. And I kind of see the label, and the label, it said app firewall. And I'm thinking, so there was actually a firewall sitting on a shelf. I'm like, that's not protecting you. It was expensive, though. We always joke about the blinking boxes, and I'm sure that there's some good ones out there with some really good salespeople, and maybe they work well, maybe they don't. And you can joke about, the sales techniques like what's the blink rate or anything like that. But unless you're actually managing it, it doesn't matter. Unless you can have all the alerts you want. If you're not looking at them, it doesn't matter. You can build a 50-story hotel, and with no foundation, it's going to fall over. So one of the things I've learned too is I always think security is not necessarily complicated, but it's really difficult to do. And my analogy is always kind of like weight loss. Like weight loss is generally not that complicated as a concept, but it's really challenging to actually do and requires a lot of effort. So it's kind of the same kind of thing. So from my perspective is, who are you always happy to see, right? It's someone that can provide a solution or can do something for you or make your life easier in some way. I'm a big fan of policy and documentation. Most people aren't. So when they hear that you like that, they want you to come back, right? I mean, if you are willing to do some stuff they hate, you're pretty helpful. I also, think of a story. I went out to it was a pretty large company that you probably have worked with at some point or bought something from. And I kind of walk in and like, hey, Alex, really glad you're here. Can you help us look at these audit findings? I'm thinking, oh, cool. We get to call, the big four, whoever was in the audit. I'm like, oh, well, who are the findings from? Like, oh, they're from internal audit. I'm like, aren't they downstairs? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, let's go ask them, right? So like, it's stuff like that. It's really simple things that just don't necessarily happen. And it's just making sure that, we're all working together and having lunch and that kind of thing. It sounds so stupid, but it's so true. Another point that you touched on is understanding operations. So if you can't help the company make money or meet its mission, it doesn't matter what you're providing. And we always see things, I think, only through the lens of security and don't always look at how the business is operating or making money. And so without understanding how that's happening and how we can support that and help that, it's kind of useless to offer solutions. If you go out and, and you're thinking it's, say, like an application, and you want to tell them you can't release it because it's not secure, but every day they don't release it costs them $1 million, they're gonna laugh at you, right? All right. So again, if no one's listening to us, in my opinion, that's our problem. I always joke, if the accounting department came to me and asked me to balance the books, that would be ridiculous, right? I mean, they'd all go to jail. So I think that, that's something that we get into too in our industry, is that we assume that everybody knows what we know and thinks about what we think about. And sometimes you kind of laugh when somebody doesn't know like what phishing is, or they click on some email that you'd never click on, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of those things that I think, knowing what people are doing, understanding their perspective is how we're able to get in there and help them out. Does anyone watch Dr. Phil? No? Anybody work from home, watch Dr. Phil? I love Dr. Phil. Anyway. But, if you watch Dr. Phil, enabling's a bad word, right? It's bringing drugs to the drug addict or bringing alcohol to an alcoholic, whatever it is. But in our world, enabling is important. Because if we're not enabling operations, it's really hard to provide value. We always joke that the most secure computer is obviously unplugged and thrown in the middle of a lake, right? But you can't do business that way. So it's trying to find a middle ground somehow that you can, have operations operate and you're able to kind of help operate securely. The other thing is, I think in our field, is that very rarely, sometimes as an auditor, it's always funny the dichotomy between going somewhere as an auditor or going somewhere as an assessor. And the big difference is when you go as an auditor, no one wants to have lunch with you, right? Like they're like, they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to tell you anything. If you're an assessor, it's good times. I would say I cannot tell anybody what to do, but I want them to understand the risk of if they don't do it. And it can be hard to articulate, of course. But that's really our job, I feel. You know, if somebody wants to have their firewalls all wide open, that's their business, right? They own it. But if they don't understand that risk, then we failed, in my opinion. The other thing I think we do all the time is walk into a room or walk into a place and see that someone's drowning, and we describe the water, and then kind of give them a report or send an email, and then you walk out. And that's why people hate, I think, a lot of consultants or security people, et cetera, because they're always describing the water when they're drowning, and it's not helpful. It's not a perfect analogy, but you know, would you tell them that drowning's bad? If you see a drowning person, like you're drowning in the pool, hey, drowning's awful. You shouldn't be drowning. You should learn to swim. Right, though? I mean, that's a lot of security, I think, is that. It's, hey, you know, get out of the water. Well, I can't get out of the water. If I get out of the water, I wouldn't be in the water. And yeah, one of the things, I don't even know where to put this, but so I was out. I spent a lot of time in LA. You probably guessed that, because I'm just kidding. But anyway, I was talking to a client in LA, and one of the things that came out is the California Attorney General said that in order to show that you've done due diligence, you need to have the SANS Top 20 in place. I'm like, okay. And it seems simple because it's on a wall, right? It's a poster on a wall. But how hard is it to actually do all that stuff? It's incredibly difficult. So that's just kind of what we run into, like these expectations and these things that are really incredibly difficult to do.
It's also not the SANS Top 20.
This is an old story.
But I wonder if they have to change legislation.
Oh, I know. I hear you.
But
But that's what happened when you reuse a presentation. But yeah. So, but I thought that was interesting. You know, but that's actually a really good point. Like, so are you supposed to?
I live in county government, and if we would never write in something that's not some kind of other government regulation,
Right.
Change without a thing. That's a private-owned, system or governing system.
I didn't think of that. But that's hilarious. Like, so what do? You go back in 3 years and hey, we were doing this. That's 3 years old. I guess, right? You know, and the other thing is, to continue the analogy, I love analogies, because I think they help people outside the industry understand what we do or what they should be doing, is you can't just tell them to stay away from the water if they're drowning, especially if their business is based on fishing, right? You know, you can continue the analogy, help them build a better boat, or give them life jackets, or nets, or I don't know. I don't fish. I'm a computer guy. I don't go outside, you know. Just, what am I going to do, right? What's that?
There's bears
I don't know what's outside because I don't go out there. This tan is all from a CRT. But, you know, and especially, and the solutions absolutely cannot impede making money. You know, so we got to find ways to help people secure things while still operating. But, to contradict what I said earlier, people are listening. You know, we end up doing a lot of board presentations. And so, actually, Dave and I went and did one a couple weeks ago. And that was actually the trip from hell, because the flight was delayed. And anyway, Miami is not a good day trip. Like, you can try to go to Miami and get back in the same day, but don't try it. But it really is. So it's got the board's attention, and people are interested. And you know, and one of the things is when you talk to them, they're really interested after. And you know, one of the things when you do board presentations is that oftentimes you'll have 5 or 10 minutes to speak, and then it's generally kind of a free-for-all after. And they really want to talk about it because anything in the news, or they want to talk about what's on their home computer, et cetera, et cetera. But the interest is there, so it's really the time I think for us to strike. I'm going to jump over this. But I will say, one of the things that we used to hear in consulting is people kind of pull you aside and they'd ask you if you could tell them what a breach costs. I'm like, well, you always know where it's going, right? Because then they want to know what it costs to provide some level of security, and they want to know whether a breach is more expensive than security. And obviously that's just ridiculous for so many reasons, but you're not hearing that as much. You don't hear that as often. So what is IT or security in a nutshell? So if everything works, well, what do you do all day, right? Because everything's working. And if nothing works, is what do you do all day? Because nothing works. And so, a lot of security is, I think, selling what doesn't happen, right? I mean, I've been driving a lot of years, and I've never had an insurance claim. But every year I pay for insurance. And if I had all that money back, it would be awesome. And I've never gotten one of those letters, those random letters, so I could have gotten away with it too. But it's kind of like that. It's like you do all this stuff, and who knows? I mean, how do you know if you prevented a breach? one company spends $10 million, one company spends $100 million on security, neither one gets breached, who was right? Or they both get breached, who was right? Right? Should you have just spent the 10 and taken the breach? I don't know. The other thing is, this is only a joke, but I always, we're pretty lucky at our companies that we get to kind of travel the world and see a lot of different things. And I always kid that, whether I'm hopping on a plane, to go through Frankfurt and then down to the Mediterranean, or, going to California, going to Wisconsin, you can probably come up with a lot of the findings from an assessment before you even get on that plane, right? Because it's the same stuff everywhere. Obviously there's a lot of detail, et cetera. And so no, I'm not going to give you a risk assessment report without coming on site because you have a mortgage and all that. But it really is, and it's, but I will say that I think it's less frustrating now because when you go back out to places for a second time, you tend to see fewer of the same things again. Again, back to what you said is so important about understanding the business. One thing in manufacturing, sometimes you run into a manufacturer who's had people tell them for years, you got to patch, you got to update, you got to do this. But it turns out that if they did that, none of their equipment would run. And so they have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of machinery that if they update the OS doesn't work. Well, yeah, update the OS, and then everyone just goes home because they don't have jobs. So if you understand why they're not doing what they're doing, then it becomes possible to help them out and show them things they can do to compensate or mitigate. Or do they not know they should be doing it? Do they not understand risk? Do they not understand security? Or do they not have the money? Do they have the staff? It's actually more common than you think to talk to people that have responsible positions in security that aren't necessarily aware of some of the basics. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So what can we do? So don't throw stuff at it. One of the biggest challenges I know with a program is making improvements because obviously, the way companies are staffed is that you're staffed to provide the services that you provide internally. So you're already working 40 or 50 or whatever hours a week, and then you want to put in new initiatives that adds on to things. So it's really making sure that if we're going to start spending more time on stuff, that we're not just throwing tactical things at it and ignoring strategy. What next? So I'm really big on the plan. So again, so rather than just figuring out what's wrong and at the moment and doing tactical solutions, it's understanding the bigger picture, why things are the way they are, and how we can change that. Because without understanding that, there's almost nothing you can do. Now in Boise, I will tell you that this generated like 45 minutes worth of questions. And although I'll tell you the crazy thing, so I went out there, right, and I'm thinking Boise, right, I'm thinking there'll be like 40 people there. They're like 400 something. And I'm in a suit and tie, because I either wear a suit and tie or I wear a t-shirt. That's like, I have nothing in between. And I was all ready to go up there and talk, and there's a lot of people. And the guy that's the presenter, I like to have a really good time, just in general. And unfortunately, for someone that works as a professional, there are a lot of pictures of it. And so he started out to introduce me, showed like 15 pictures of me doing really stupid stuff. And so it kind of caught me off guard, and then I had to give the presentation. So that was not one of my more fun things, but I powered through it. So does anyone have any questions?
Dave Kennedy always does like a live demo of some of his project he's working on.
Yes.
Can you do a live demo of like writing a policy?
Do you want to do that? I will tell you, like, one of the things you'll learn working with me is be careful what you bet me, because I'll do it. Ask Ken, who's legendary for pranks. So anyway, but definitely, yes. And with the Hollywood thing, it's actually interesting to flip on the TV and like see them using on TV like programs that your boss wrote. So at least they're getting it more accurate, right? Slowly but surely. Are there really no other questions?
I've got a question.
Of course.
Right? So you talk about forming a plan and prioritizing and whatnot. What does that actually look like? Like, how do you put a priority on something, right? That all your machines are valuable. All of them have important data. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a machine. How do you actually?
Are they all valuable though? So because when you do if you look at like criticality of systems, people will oftentimes tell you that they need like a recovery point or recovery time of 0. It's like, okay, but that's going to cost $1 million out of your budget. Like, nope, a week is fine, right? So, that happens all the time. So it is. So I think that people are usually surprised at how they can segment it off. But as far as the program, I think it really does. It does start with an impact analysis and kind of the data analysis and the criticality. You constantly see people try to put in a program to protect things without knowing what they're protecting. Or they'll say we're going to put all these controls on anything that's deemed confidential or whatever their internal thing is. It's like, well, what's confidential? We don't know. We don't know what the data is. Well, how are you going to protect it, right? Not much I can do for you at that point, So, does that answer your question at all or not?
Yeah.
'Cause I can ramble for.
I got another question.
Yeah, you know me well. I can talk for hours. All right.
I got another question.
Yeah.
So getting into all this stuff, like obviously I'm just a programmer. I don't know anything about any of it. Do you have any recommended resources or blogs or anything that could give me information on GRC in general and setting up a program, any of that kind of stuff to help me better understand that kind of situation?
I do. I'm actually working on a book that will be available in.
I'll buy one.
It's a long story, but yeah, that's. But no, there are a lot of resources out there. I think that, one of the things is, with the books is things change so quickly. But as far as resources, I'll have lunch with you. That's one. I'll have lunch with anybody here, by the way, if I'm in town, which is pretty rare. But let me know. I'm down for whatever. But no, so I think that it's tougher, and that from a program perspective is that there are a lot of organizations out there. But a lot of them are focused on regulatory things. So how do you build a program? And it's interesting because a few years ago, you heard so much about ISO, and now you're hearing a lot more like NIST. As people are moving towards that, which is like less program focused. But there's the challenge, right?
What's the general board perception of the biggest risk? So we talk to board members, and I'm sure it's like all over the place. But what do they actually think is the biggest risk?
I think that to a lot of them, and it really runs the gamut, right? And let me just preface whatever I say. When you talk about experience with clients or customers, you have to remember that the only ones that you see have interest in security or you wouldn't be there, right? So I don't know what the ones that don't care enough about security to talk to a security consultant are doing because I don't see them, right? It's just the bias there. But I think there's a lot of concern. It depends what's in the news right then. So a few weeks ago it's Swift. Everyone wants to talk about Swift. Or they'll hear a term like they talk about an APT, or they think Korea's out to get them, or whatever it is. So it generally is a lot of times what's been in the news, or what they're getting hit on with regulations.
How often do your clients run procurement decisions by you about whether or not they should use a specific vendor or technology?
Well, so I won't speak for us as a consultancy or a vendor, but I would say in general, when organizations are choosing things, it's not nearly as often as you take that. You want to take it? All right. It's not as often as we'd like that it even goes through IT. And there's certain organizations that I think are more notorious for that than others. Healthcare is a nightmare. If you work with healthcare organizations, oftentimes, especially the way everyone's gobbling up all these practices, and they have all these regional hospitals. If someone will go out and they'll buy a $10 million radiology machine, and it doesn't work with any of the current equipment. So they got to write something to connect it to, and of course that doesn't create vulnerability, right? So so even talking to IT, but it's getting better. But again, I have to tell you that from a bias perspective, a company that would have us out to talk to them or do an assessment is thinking about security already. So they're going to be more likely to include security in a procurement decision. And then there's levels of including security. So is security involved in creating a list, a questionnaire, or are they using the SIG or something? Or is security doing on-site assessments? Does security have the power to say no, is the other one. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But security doesn't always have the option to say, no, you cannot use this vendor.
Let's keep going. Where are the top most common no flags that you look for that you would just immediately say to customer client, I can't use this one?
So it depends on what they're providing, right? So if you're talking about critical vendors, if they're providing software services, then obviously if they're not doing basic software security things, like whatever you would have in a software security program like peer review and awareness of the OWASP, et cetera. If they're providing equipment, it could be down to the manufacturing level where you're looking at how things are connected on boards. Or just general, if it's a service provider, if you're going to give your usually what it is we're going to give our data to these people. And then do they have any type of security program? Do they have penetration testing performed by somebody competent? What does their program look like? Is it documented, et cetera? But it's usually just a lack of a program in general. And it's shocking how often you see that. Well, it's not shocking anymore, but it should be shocking. It should be absolutely shocking. It should break all our brains, but it doesn't anymore. Any more questions? There are going to be more questions. All right. I'm serious about lunch. Anybody ever wants to be out in Strongsville? Have lunch? I'm totally down. Are you still recording?
Yeah.
Let me know when you stop recording. Because I got a story.
Sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.